Hi, my name's Fiona Van Oyen. I'm a printmaker and cut paper installation artist living and working from my home and studio in Christchurch, New Zealand. If I were asked to describe my practice and why I do the things I do, I'd sum it up by saying two main aspects are drivers in my approach to art making: understanding myself through place and building resilience. Not so much interested in landscape as scenery or an external thing to look out at. My interest is in the relationship with the land. When land becomes more than a landscape and becomes place, the consideration of land and place as inscape, if you will, what we carry in us. Knowing yourself through places, the histories and stories that are formed from knowing where you come from and where you stand. Place has meaning, like the Māori concept of Te Rangawaiwai. It is a place to stand, the place where the self understands itself. As I age and feel myself changing, and see my places changing too, I think about the inside, outside, or the relationship between my body and the body of the land. The French philosopher Gilles Deleuze wrote, "Being is a state of constant change and newness." This can apply to a landscape as much as a person, which is perhaps why humans tend to respond viscerally to places we are familiar with as they change and we change with them. It was the physical link to the land, the idea of being made of the same star stuff as the planet, that formed my work Carbon, Water and Air. This work started off as a waterway and ended up looking like a galaxy, or perhaps a macroscopic study of cells and bone, an involvement from the original source image that has some serendipity about it. Originally based on a photograph I took of a stream I regularly walk by near my home, this work began as concerns for the ecology of our waterways. But as I transcribed the image of the stream from the original photo into a drawing that was usable for carving blocks to make prints, my mind shifted more to literally using the materials of water, carbon and air, the main elements in all living matter, to make a portrait of the waterway. In making this work, heavy cotton paper was soaked in the bath so it would become soft and pliable when squeezed through my printing press for my carved blocks to emboss the paper. Once the embossed paper had dried, I suspended it over my head and I used a candle flame to draw into the emboss. As the smoke from the lit candle floated through the air, landing on the embossed paper, the soot from the flame began to reveal the latent image from the emboss that I knew was there, but without the soot from the candle was hard to see. As the soot falls on the embossed paper, I slowly build up layers of soot where I want more tone. How the soot lands on the paper and the emboss can also be affected by the temperature in the room and my breath, which for me is a lovely explicit happening, referencing back to that idea of inside, outside of the body. At this point, I had stopped referring to my original source photo in the drawing, working more intuitively with the emboss itself, and the work took on a life of its own. Another thing that I love about this process is there is always the risk of passing the candle flame across the paper too much. The paper burning, destroying the whole thing, which introduces the second aspect to my practice, which is to do with building resilience, my own resilience and the resilience of the artwork. Through my practice, I try to push against established rules and limits, my own physical limits, the limits of the materiality, and the accepted traditions within the printmaking processes of lino and woodcut, while at the same time trying to keep a close eye on the work being archivally strong. I want my body and the work to last well. Another example of that pushing is in large cut paperworks. While I'm cutting away the shadows in a landscape to flatten the image and reveal an inner structure, like a hidden map of place, if you will, I try to push the limits of the paper and how it responds to gravity, so I might cut away more at the top where the paper has to carry the weight of the work. My approach to portraying these landscapes is through a phenomenological lens, or building on that relationship to place and the responses the work invites. That is, I'm not so interested in putting down just the visual realism. Early works around 2013-14 dealt with that, but even within those works there was a push against the limits of the graphic or the hard edge lino and woodcut printmaking traditions. In this series I was trying to achieve a less hard-edged graphic that reductive lino cut techniques normally result in. I was trying to achieve tonal subtlety while also keeping the rich emboss. The potential for relief sculptural form on the surface of the paper that is always important to me. In later works, I dig deeper to try to understand why that surface tactility in print is so important to me, and I came to understand why through my postgraduate studies. I completed a fine arts degree in printmaking from Canterbury University in Christchurch, New Zealand, decades ago. Then on graduation segued into working as a medical illustrator at 2 hospitals in Christchurch that were both teaching hospitals. I did a teaching diploma when my children were little because I wanted to understand the education system they were about to enter into. Time ran away and I ended up teaching secondary school art for 20 plus years, a career I loved but needed to leave to pursue my own practice. I was ready and hungry for it by then. I recently completed my Masters in Fine Arts with distinction from the Dunedin School of Art here in New Zealand, and I'm now a full-time practicing and exhibiting artist. This has all evolved naturally and taken decades. During my postgraduate studies, I discovered the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty's theories on phenomenology, embodiment, and perception. His readings made so much sense to me and still do to this day, helping me to understand myself through my practice. I've come to understand why the opposites in my practice suit me. the fast and slow aspects of my process, the periods of physicality and still contemplation, the carefully planned and the happen chance. These opposites also extend into the materials I use: densely layered ink for gloss, thin ink for matte, sheen in metallic paint juxtaposed alongside chalky flashy paint, a cut line and a block for hard-edged definition, and for soft, subtle emboss, ink for solid colour and soot for soft, ethereal tone. Another aspect Merleau-Ponty considers is the perception of time. In my practice, I use scale as a trope to subtly layer in a trigger that works for me to not only describe tone, but to also feel time through a slowing or calming response, or a heightened active response. Small, intense marks can give the feeling of slowing time or the static. Small marks can also make us feel bigger or on the outside of, looking in. In comparison, larger marks can read as fast, movement, or physicality. Large can also make us feel more physically diminished in comparison, but at the same time, they draw us in and we find ourselves becoming aware of a physical response inside our body. I also think about the overall scale of work in relation to the scale of my body as I stand before it. To make works that have one experience from afar and another close up is not just about looking. It gives the viewer an opportunity to respond to the works on various levels. The paper cut works I make are also about time and memory, in that cutting away is a metaphor for time, the past or what has gone, remnants that are there but not there. And the constantly changing shadow play the paper cuts create as the natural light passes over them within the environments they are installed are a reminder of now and the living present as the light effects they create change with the time of day. There are so many artists' works I respond to, and who I'm interested in often changes with my current focus. But mainstay artists I look to are Louise Bourgeois, Pierre Bonnard, Frances Hodgkins, Di French, Goya, contemporary Chinese art, and many, many more. Louise Bourgeois in particular is an important inspiration as a woman and an artist. While she continued quietly making throughout her life, she put her practice on hold for decades to focus on raising her sons, but the whole time reading and still learning about herself and her craft. She didn't have her first solo exhibition until she was 60, a similar story to my own. Music is important to me in my studio. I have quite an eclectic taste that tends to be determined by what I'm working on at the time. During the making of Carbon, Water and Air in Suspirium, as you can tell from the title, it was Radiohead. But the feel I have while working on a project will determine what I listen to. Once an idea is established in my head, music frees me from my own internal head noise and helps me to just get on with it in a more intuitive way. With the hard part of the making behind me, that's the formal, the controlled part, with music the more fun, freer part kicks in and happy accidents can happen that, if they work, I leave in there. Did you notice yet another opposite in my practice here? At the moment, I have two projects on the go. One is a collaborative project with another artist here in Christchurch, and the second is still in the planning stages, but I can visualise it and how it will work. This project that I'm still currently planning will go toward my next solo exhibition that's already booked in here in Christchurch for 2025. I'm excited, but at the same time a bit scared, which is usually a good sign. Don't they say you should do one thing every day that scares you? What I hope people take away from my artwork is that the work will hold their attention long enough to look and respond to, that the work will take them on their own journey. I'm still learning how to communicate about my works when I'm asked to do so, because while the making of the work is around my story, I don't want what it is to me to get in the way of the viewer's experience. I would like the work to be an opportunity for them to discover their own response and add to their own story, perhaps in a way they hadn't anticipated. My advice to anyone thinking of going into this art-making world is always stay true to yourself. That means know what interests you and don't be deviated by fashion or other people's requests. Be prepared for the long haul this art world can be. It's a slow-moving game, so you need to be patient. Do something every day, even if it's just tidying your workspace. I'm in my studio every day, but I tend to find alternate days are more productive than consecutive days. So I fall into a pattern of one day of full-on making and the next spent on reading, research, admin, planning, or writing. Always keep a workbook going as your daily practice. You think you'll remember that idea you had in the middle of the night, but believe me, by morning it would have gone. Also, I think I remember the reasons why I choose to make a certain decision in a work, but honestly, if you don't notate, you do forget. So it's important to keep the workbook honest. Then it will become a real living resource for you to go back to. I still look back on things I wrote in a 10-year-old workbook and often find myself reinventing an idea. Making art should be a constant forward, backward, forward process. Also, notate those technical things that can be tedious to record, but honestly, it's so important. Follow your dreams. Your parents or friends may say, how do you expect to make a living doing art? When you do what you love, even if it's as a sideline while you're doing something else to financially survive, it's through doing what you love that you nourish your soul, meet or learn about like-minded people, and your life is the richer for it. My parents weren't happy about me going to art school. They were children of the Depression, so I do understand their fears. They wanted to make sure the decisions I made would lead to financial security, independence, and a better start to life than they had had. Also, they saw the value in the untrained skills I already had as a kid with observational drawing skills, a skill that's accessible, I guess, and that people can relate to, but for me it wasn't enough. I knew there was a depth and a secret language beyond visual realism in art that I wanted to access through art school, but my parents assumed that education would ruin or contaminate the skills I already had and have me making weird stuff no one could understand. They would have also worried about me ending up with a student debt. My advice to my own kids and the kids I taught is always to follow your dreams. Do what you're good at, what comes easily to you, and what you're genuinely interested in. If you don't know what those things are, keep trying new stuff and it will come to you. While at school, don't just make subject choices on the basis of a potential career. The world is changing so fast, what you end up making a living from probably doesn't even exist yet. So in the meantime, follow your dreams and build on your strengths because they will help you to confront your weaknesses. You have a whole lifetime ahead of you, and learning is a lifetime activity. It doesn't stop when you leave school. Treat every day as an opportunity and a gift. Stay curious and open.